Hi, this is Regular Magazine. I'm Jason, and with the release of a new edition of Blood Bowl just around the corner, we thought we'd take a look at the very first edition. This one. Now, Blood Bowl is a miniature board game that was designed by Jervis Johnson for Games Workshop, and it was basically a parody of American football. It was first released in sort of around 86, 87, and then since then had various updated editions. And Blood Bowl takes place in the alternate Warhammer Fantasy world with humans, goblins, dwarves, elves, orcs, trolls, the whole range gamut of fantasy races. Now, first edition, which as I said was created by Jervis Johnson and released by Games Workshop, originally featured flat cardboard team pieces in the box. That first year of release, they also brought out some metal miniatures, basically attackers and defenders, which were designed by Morrison and Goodwin. But they weren't a full race of teams. There was like they did the Ogre, which was designed by Ali and Trish Morrison, was basically the only big guy that was available as a miniature. There were a lot of other first edition figures, which were like a couple of goblins, a couple of humans, and a couple of elves. It wouldn't be until second edition when we see a full sort of effectively team, so to speak. And that was the first one they brought out was the elves. Now, that first inaugural edition that was brought out in the sort of 86, 87, and is marking nearly 40 years of probably one of Games Workshop's most established and recognised board games. And it's extremely popular. Now, there have been numerous editions made over the year that both featured metal and plastic miniatures. Many have become defining icons of the game, and this is going to be a slight examination of that first edition. We're going to take a look at the board game that was available in that first box, what we actually got in that box, and then there's the expansions and stuff like that. Now, the original one wasn't boxed with miniatures; it was just cardboard standees. However, Games Workshop, after that first edition, started to bring out, as I said before, some metal miniatures for the game, but they weren't full teams. It was just a couple of each race. Some had a few more than others, but it was essentially one or two per race in that first year or two. Now, those minis embodied the sort of aesthetic that the rest of the game had around the artwork and stuff, and it was almost an American football style look. But that's because it came out on a wave of popularity when that sort of sport came into the UK. Around that time, American football became hugely popular. It wasn't really something as we Brits knew much about until the early 80s. And so Blood Bowl was sort of basically developed on that sort of wave of interest and popularity for the sport. And obviously, Blood Bowl was a fantasy version of American football with more death, glory, and brutal sort of aspects to it that aren't featured in the actual sport. Helmets would have spikes, shoulder pads would have spikes, the players would have spiked gloves and stuff like that. It was a more sort of brutal, sort of almost like death race style version of the sport. Anyway, let's get in, take a look at what was in the box components if you had bought that game at that time back in the mid-80s. So, first edition Blood Bowl came in this box. It's when you compare it to the modern boxes, modern editions, it's quite a small box, but it does have this great artwork on it of the ogre crashing through what looks like a human. Well, I think it's mixed. It's got human, we've got dark elf, we've got all sorts here. It's a great image for Blood Bowl, and it kind of sets the scene for this game. Now, in the original box, and mine is quite battered, as it is now quite significantly quite old. The game came out around 86, 87, so we're looking at around nearly 30 years old. This box originally came out. It came out with a wooden pitch. We had rosters, blank rosters, the rule book, and then we got these standees for the teams. Now, we don't get every team in this first set, but we do get a significant amount. So we get humans, orcs, zombies, ogres, dark elves, and undead mummy. There's also a referee, football counter, 2 score markers, a pad of 50 team sheets, the rule book, the plastic standees for each of the 2 teams, and then some 6-sided dice. Now the pitch was quite large. It was modular. Let me just get all this out at the moment. All that to one side for the time being. So those are our standees, and the cards just slot straight in those. We have our blank roster team. So you put all your stats in and your team names or injuries notes and stuff like that in your roster. We got questions and answer sheet. Now, this one, it was for the expansion, because I've got the expansion as well as the original. So the expansion was Death Zone. Now, I don't have the box for Death Zone anymore. It got damaged in one of the many house moves over the years. So I do have the expansion for this. I've also got various printouts of stuff, which we will just remove. It's all being stored in this one box. Now, so this was the original board. As you can see, it's quite thick card. It was quite simplistic in comparison to modern. It was all out on a grid system. So it's 25 by 25 grid. Typical sort of miniature size grid. So we have an away team, home team end. It was pretty basic as a pitch goes in comparison to some of the newer games and versions of the game. Now, we have multiple standees. Now, the coloured standees are from Death Zone. The standees that came original box were the black ones. So the standees were basically pretty standard sort of artwork. I've managed to keep these in really good condition. These were, now whilst we only had card at the time, and on more update versions they have plastic miniatures. What this did was, in this one set, we got numerous teams. So we had elf, we had dwarf. There were undead. We had dwarf. We had the goblin, which had trolls. We had the skeletons. for undead, and you could mix and match those undead. So you could play zombie ghouls and skeletons in a sort of vampire camp style. We had Nurgle rotters, the infamous halfling team, and then dark elf. The expansion brought more teams. So we got, with Death Zone, we got further teams. So we had goblins, we had Norse, which had berserkers in there. We had the knights, which is basically Bretonian knights. We had werewolves, which had two states. So you had the human state and the werewolf state. There were hobgoblins. And we also had half orcs. Now, I'm going to move this to one side. The rule book was fairly simple back then. It was a fairly easy game to pick up rules-wise. And it had that sort of comic flavour of that's followed the game throughout all editions. You know, where it was the little snippets of sort of background lore information, and it's done in that sort of tongue-in-cheek sort of style. That's stayed with the game all the way through. So we got in this first set, we got the humans, dwarves, elves, halflings, orc, dark elf, lesser goblins, and then we had big guys such as ogre, trogs, trolls, and then there was the undead, which was zombies, skeletons, mummies, and ghouls. Now, Treeman would come in Death Zone. Death Zone brought in additional rules and teams, but also around the same time Death Game came out, they were starting to bring out metal miniatures for the game. And as I said, there weren't many when it first came. When they started bringing them out, it was like one or two for the teams. So we got some Skaven, and these were when Skaven came out. I do recall that this was the first time that Skaven had been introduced as a new race to fantasy. A few months before they were brought out for Blood Bowl, and I think it was issue 86 or 87 of White Dwarf had a lot more information about the Skaven team, Blood Bowl team, and background. So, as I said, Death Zone brought out new players. It also introduced things like leagues. So there were extra players, extra coaching staff. It also brought in wizards. And we also had star players and secret weapons. And then there was an introduction of new teams. So he brought in the undead teams, chaos dwarf teams, halfling teams. We got more for goblins. We got and we used chaos teams, minotaur players, troll players, wood elf teams, and treeman players. So it brought in two more big players, minotaur and treemen. So, like I said, the rules again followed that sort of very easy to pick up. The artwork hadn't changed, the style and feature around that artwork. It introduced things like Dwarf Death Roller. We had some small skills that were brought in on the expansion, but this was the big thing because the leagues. It was now gave you rules for leagues. I think prior to this we were already playing in leagues, but this gave us more guidelines for leagues. So we had star player points and things like that, and then injury tables. So your players could miss games and things like that, or lose stats and stuff. So it expanded the game and made it a bit more in depth with this new expansion. So we could play tournaments and stuff like that. And tournament features a big feature of Blood Bowl. It was, I think, from very early on in the game's history, there were tournaments being run for Blood Bowl, and like I said, it was one of the most popular, what we termed specialist games. And when GW got rid of the specialist games, the fan base for this kept it alive. They even introduced new updates of the rules and things like that before eventually GW brought it back in as when they re-brought the specialist games back after several years of getting rid of them. So you got halfling teams, and it gives us team profiles for like sort of big name teams like Greenfield Grasshuggers, and they do that the same with all of the new teams that were introduced with this expansion. So we got Wood Elf for both teams, and then we have Tree Men, and you could use Tree Men with Wood Elves, and you could use Tree Men with Halflings. And so that was one of the good things about the expansion, was things like we could run Goblin teams. So prior to that, if I remember rightly, you took goblins with orcs, or you took goblins with others. But now within the expansion, we can now field an entire goblin team or an entire halfling team. I have run halfling teams before. They never win very often, but they are quite amusing to play. And then over teams with chaos teams, and then chaos dwarf teams and undead teams. So like with chaos teams, we could run beastmen and warriors together. Chaos dwarves, you could run the dwarves and the hobgoblins. And like I said before, undead, you could run a number of different undead creatures together in a team. So in the case of this, we could have skeletons with the bulk of your team, and then you could run that with a zombies, some ghouls, wights, and a mummy. So the early on edition of the game was quite basic in the fact that it was using card rather than plastic miniature. But we did get like star players like Flood. And that made it. Back then I felt that made it quite. It was quite good that we got these cards, because that meant we could field any number of teams and play any number of different team types. Which, with the more modern ones, when you buy the starter set, you're stuck with only two teams. If you want any additional teams, you're going to have to buy the plastic set once it's released. This way, we had all the teams in one box, so we could pick and try a team. And as we generally did, we just like we'd mix it up, and one week we might play humans, the next week we might try out elves, and then when they started releasing miniatures, we already knew which team we liked best because we'd already played them. We played multiple teams, so we went out and bought the miniatures for them. But it was really good. I mean, the cards they worked really well, and like I said, you could go and say, well, I fancy trying the hobgoblins out, see how they play. I think these would be quite good now, still, because you could test a team to see if you like it, and if you don't have to go and buy it. you'd only buy. You could try out all the teams that are available before you actually buy the miniatures. There's nothing worse than thinking, "Oh, I'm going to go and buy such and such," and then when you start playing them, you know, "Oh, they don't. I don't like the way they play. I wish I got on another team now." With the cards, you could try a team out before buying it. So that first edition of Blood Bowl is quite simplistic in comparison to modern versions, later more modern versions of the game. But it did have some of its good points. Like I said, you got all those card stock sort of teams, so you could try out a team, and if you didn't like it, you could try another team out. You could play different teams against your opponents. So you didn't need your friends to go out and buy a team to try the game out either. It was meant you could introduce a game to people who've never played it before, and they could pick any team they wanted and get playing it. They weren't stuck with the two teams that come in the starter box like most modern version editions do. Now you could pretty much go, well, I fancy playing goblins this week, and so your friend goes, and your friend goes, well, I think I'll try out the dwarves, and you were able to do so because we had all of these card minis, which made it really great as a game straight out of the box. It worked really well, and it worked really well when you were introducing people that had never played it before, and they had choices of which teams they could try out or play. And so that was one of the good things about a first edition. And also, the rules were really simple back then. It was really easy to pick up, really easy to sort of pick up and play with those rules. They were quite simple, quite nice, fast gameplay as well. I think the game's come a long way since this first edition, but I do like the first edition box set because, like I said, I really like the fact we've got every team available in a cardstock. Now, could they do that now? They could. I think today's generation of players, they probably wouldn't be satisfied with getting cardboard miniatures. Like we were quite happy back in the day to do so. But then saying, you know, we were playing second edition fantasy, you didn't get miniatures, it was card miniatures. It wasn't until I think maybe third or fourth edition they started boxing up plastic miniatures in the starter set for Warhammer Fantasy. So we were kind of used to not getting the miniatures in a starter box back then. So I think with a modern audience and the modern players, they wouldn't be satisfied because they kind of expect, most people nowadays expect in a starter set to have two horses of at the very least plastic miniatures. I mean, maybe they could do it as an extra add-on. So you get the plastic miniatures and you get these. So you can try out the other teams to try and work out which ones you prefer. I don't know. For me, that was one of the good things about that first edition. You could add the opportunity to play any of the teams before making a final decision which team you were going to stick with. But most of us tried out all kinds of things. I mainly played humans, but I did at times play halfling. I played about with other races like goblins and dwarf and elf, but I eventually stuck on humans, and that's I pretty much played humans most of the time in all the other editions. But I did like that fact I didn't need to buy a team like now if I wanted to have a try of something. Now, if I wanted to have, say, play elves, I've got to either use proxies or I go out and buy the elves. Though, because I have these, I don't proxy. I just kind of play with these and then make that decision of whether I'm going to buy the plastic versions. Um, so I've got that ability, but most people, it's you've got to have a proxy or buy them straight away. And I do think that most people anyway buy because they like the look of a team rather than how they play. But some of us like to know how they play as well. So that first edition came and went. They brought out a second edition, and then subsequently, the further editions got bigger. The boards got bigger, and we got plastic miniatures, and then I think by about third or fourth edition, most of the sort of miniatures were being produced in plastic. There was very little in uh, metal, and then it went to sort of fine cast for a bit. And now I think the newer editions, it's all plastic. So all plastic teams. And like I said at the beginning, we're just around the corner from a new edition exploding onto the market this year. GW have sort of showcased off the new starter set, and it looks really good. And I will be getting a copy when it comes out. And at the moment there are a lot of YouTube is full of videos where people are talking and discussing that first edition. I haven't bothered that new edition. Sorry, not first edition. I haven't bothered because I don't really like to make videos unless I've got it in my hands and to show off. I don't really want to make videos where we've only got pictures to look at. So I will do it when I get hold of the set. I'll do an unboxing and I'll go through it and I'll look at it and everything. So I thought I'd do this video look back at the first edition to see what you got in first edition, and show off what when it first came out, what you got in that starter box for Blood Bowl, and so you can see how far it's come from back then over the last 30 years to where it is now, as a board game, because it essentially is a board game. The way it's developed, and we've gone from cardboard standees to really nice plastic miniatures, bigger boards, everything. I think everything is just bigger in comparison, and more. The rules have improved and expanded over time as well. So it's gone from that sort of really quite simple, fast game into a more in-depth, still a fast-play game, but there's a lot more depth to it now than what that first edition had. Anyway, that's all for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what was the first edition you started with. Was it first edition? Was it second, third, or was it one of the more newer ones? Anyway, that's all for now. See you next time.